Get back into kind of the fundamental how to science kind of stuff. How are things going with proposal writing and annotated bibliographies? And we know how fieldwork's going. It's going 30 miles an hour, and so on and so forth.
I read a few more papers.
Okay.
That's about
Slowly. I think I just need to sit down and put more into it.
Okay, right on. Some people like doing it in like these big sprints, as they're called. Like, you get a rainy, boring Saturday, and so you just go over to the campus library and just bang stuff out for 10 hours straight, hunting and pecking on your keyboard. Other folks, it's much more functional and sustainable to do like a goal. So in like a writing phase, it'd be like 500 words a day, something like that. Like a page or two of really good stuff. Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, a lot of famous authors do that. Like they try to write a couple of pages. Most of them will actually handwrite it for cognitive reasons. But kind of whichever way you're sort of wired to work is okay, as long as you are sort of consciously and actively working with how you work well, so that it doesn't all kind of pile up on you the last second. That's when stuff goes wrong. So it's okay if you're still setting those habits. That's okay, but definitely set those habits. Cool. And if there's any, I haven't seen any personally in the last 48 hours, but if there are any like on-campus research discussions or anything like that, keep those in mind for the research seminar evaluations. 2 of those for the end of the semester, and all that in the syllabus. Any other questions or announcements before we jump in?
For the research seminars, was it 2 that we had?
Correct.
And then did any of them have to be out of the department? Was it?
That's the general sense of it. As long as it's not like somebody in your research group, so that the temptation isn't to focus on the content. It's more completely about, what font size did they use in their PowerPoint slide deck? Were they clearly audible at the back of the room? Did they tune the jargon way, way, way up and speaking only to the experts in the room? Or was it a much more of an open language, much more accessible to a more general, still professional and technical audience, but maybe not expertise level specialists kind of an approach? Neither one is better than the other. They're just different tools for accomplishing very different things, So it's good to think analytically and a little bit separated from the content of whatever the talk is about, just on the science communication techniques. And we'll get more into what to look for later on the semester, kind of after this stuff. But, just at any point, if you see anything that seems interesting as a talk, it's Black History Month right now. So there's a bunch of stuff going on around campus with that and so forth.
How do we find whenever somebody's doing a talk like that? Because I know the forestry department sends out an email, but we don't get emails from other departments like that.
Right. Most all departments have, usually within their, they're called departmental operating papers. It's kind of the constitution for each department. They'll have a requirement that things like thesis seminars or dissertation seminars or guest speakers, they have to be publicly posted in paper and stuff like that. So if you're ever walking across campus, just take a detour through the nearest building, whatever it is. Like if it's the geology program across campus over by Anthony Hall or the student services building, just dip on through there. They'll have a seminar series of folks that they bring in each semester, or grad students presenting stuff, or whatever. The student center is also really good for these as well. Events and stuff like that on their website is excellent. They maintain a calendar of events at the student center, and there's all kinds of academic stuff and non-academic stuff going on there as well. So, yeah. That'd be a good excuse to stretch your legs if you're stuck on some particular aspect of writing or ingesting journal articles or something like that. Stretch your legs for 10 minutes and get some sunshine and fresh air and get your body self-regulated again so that your mind can re-attack whatever thorny problem you're working on. That's a very specific functional technique. All right, let's see. Let's jump back in. So we left off talking about ideographic versus nomothetic research, and that brought us to the scientific method. So to kind of refresh your memories, ideographic research would be like case study style research. So it's super deep about one specific individual person or an organization. The example we used last week was Apple. As a $1 trillion company, what's their secret sauce? So you're not studying 1,000 different companies. You're diving deep on Apple to figure out what is interesting or unique or highly successful or highly dysfunctional about that particular phenomenon. And you can't run a bunch of statistics typically on ideographic research. Nomothetic research, on the other hand, is totally the opposite end. It's a mile wide. There might be 1 million respondents. It might be 100 million respondents. If you're a company like Google doing nomothetic research on all of your users, seeing what color or what font works 0.1% better on the Google homepage, for example, it's not very deep. We're not getting to know any of these users very much. We're not even tracking any of these users very long. It's 15 seconds on the homepage at Google, typing something in and seeing if that leads to a better outcome or not. So this would be a big data approach, where ideographic research is a deep data approach. It tends to be more of a qualitative approach in ideographic research versus a quantitative approach, lots of statistics, number crunching, and statistical difference testing and modeling, stuff like that, in nomothetic research. So that got us right up to this here, the scientific method. And deducting, that is working from a general theory to a meso or mid-level theory down to a more specific, kind of operationalized theory specific to your research question. What research question are you setting up at the outset, and then deducing answers to that, running this cycle forward or clockwise. So you formulate research questions, you throw your hypotheses into your research proposal, you cook up a list of methods according to your methodology, which is your philosophy of methods, and then run some trials, collect some field data, have a truck breakdown, get back to the lab, analyze a bunch of data, and figure out a bunch of graphs and statistical tests and regression analyses and stuff like that. And then whip those into a results and discussion and see how those answer your research question. That's very much the deductive approach. The nomothetic approach generally aligns with this deductive style. So it's working from some theory, some pre-existing guess of how things are, how things work. This is great for testing mechanisms of understanding. So do we understand how a star works in terms of, hydrogen and helium fusion as a big fusion reactor? So we develop a theory about that based on our research question of wanting to know how stars work. Develop some hypotheses out of those theories and research questions, and then build a big computer model that basically runs a synthetic or in silico, on silicon version of a star on a computer chip. And we run some trials, we vary the mix of hydrogen and helium, the size, the gravity coefficient, the temperatures, all that stuff. And then we just see how it goes. And if our data come out along how we expected, then we subscribe to that guiding theory a little bit more. If our data come out real differently than we expected, then we say, oops, we've broken that theory. That's exciting and new. Let's build a better theory. That's deductive research, deducing what's going on. Running the process in reverse, counterclockwise, off of this graph, is all about inducting theory. getting to asking a better informed question as the endpoint instead of the starting point. So, put another way, so unwrapping this cycle into a linear structure, we get this. Deductive reasoning gives us general theory to specific theory to testable application, with an example of forming opinions on groups happens through the media that we consume, as one example of a general social theory. A specific sort of adaptation, or we would call it an operationalization of putting practical limits and terms and specifics into that general theory, would be, in the past 20 years, United States television has covered Muslims negatively based on things like September 11th and the nearly unending wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where multiple generations of American military families have fought in the same theaters of battle for the first time. And then you get this specific idea out of that, which would be like your research question out of this more general theory of, do American teens view Muslims negatively as a function of the media that they consume? Or a different or richer way to ask that same question is, how do American teens view Muslims more positively or more negatively as a function of the media that they consume? And so we, collect a bunch of survey responses or do a bunch of interviews or whatever, and we track the media that teens are exposed to, and we do some correlation or even regression on media and then opinions about Muslims in this target population. That's deductive. Big picture to small specific thing, and we try to test and accept or test and reject our theory, our hypothesis, our sense of how the mechanism works. Inductive reasoning, unwrapping that cycle in the opposite direction, gets us kind of a grassroots or ground-up approach. So you start with data, and generally you have a vague sense of where your data might take you, but the whole point of this is to build a theory, induct a theory of what is going on, in the sense of why should it be that we already know enough about everything to deduct everything. Sometimes we just need to go the opposite direction and start from scratch in a way and build up into some big sort of unified grand theory. So in this case, of course, we'd have some conversations with American teens relative to their sensation of Muslims. We'd talk with American teens about what media they are consuming, what kinds of media, what apps are they using, for example, and what content are they consuming within those apps. And then we start talking with folks that each of our initial contacts recommends to talk with. Maybe each of our initial contacts knows somebody that knows something more about it, so we talk to them as well. And we see how that nuances the conversation, kind of a second generation conversation. And then maybe a third generation or wave of conversation contacts, or survey instrumentation or whatever. And you start hearing not so much in thousands or millions of data points of survey responses, but in like a half dozen really cool quotes is one way that this typically shows up. Just one person happened to say in a very articulate way that really encapsulates a lot of what you're hearing from the others about how teens who are in contact with Muslim identifying folks, maybe their classmates or families of their classmates in high school, the more contact that they have with like actual regular Muslims, the less fear they tend to express, less anxiety they tend to articulate about thinking about or coexisting, safely and peacefully with Muslims who are generally safe and peace folks like anybody else. So we get from there, we form the theory of the so-called contact hypothesis. And this is, see how we started with this question of how do media and teenagers interact to form some sensation of perceptions of Muslims? The contact hypothesis isn't really talking about media. It's like, okay, well, we asked that question, we didn't really get much, so the theory swerved in this new direction as it was being born, and now it's about how much contact time, how much face-to-face, how many day-to-day, normal, sort of casual, informal exposures do teenagers have in their school setting, in their extracurricular setting, with Muslims, if they are not themselves identifying as Muslim. So that's kind of inductive reasoning. And in field research and hydrology, not a whole lot of inductive work going on. It's more, we have theories of how nutrients or pollutants diffuse through soil matrices and get into waterways and stuff like that. And we can test those theories using deductive reasoning pretty effectively with lots of sampling and sample analysis and so forth. Okay? So another way to formulate this is, sorry for the formatting there, deduction is running downward from theory to observation, and induction is running upward from observation through generalization up to theory. So a lot of different ways of expressing the same sort of conceptual ideas, right? We can't have one without the other. We need induction to build a theory to start with, and then we need deduction to kind of kick the tires, so to speak, metaphorically, on those theories that we build inductively by deducing more specific realities out of them, okay? So far so good? Clear as mud? All right, each of these inductive versus deductive approaches has kind of a place in the life cycle of studying a phenomenon. So exploratory research would be this new topic comes up, whatever that topic might be. Exploratory research tends to be very inductive, and it's just getting a sense of what the phenomenon is. What are we even talking about here? This is some new thing. In the news lately, there's been a lot of talk about ChatGPT-3 and ChatGPT-4 and Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and all of these AI content generation things that can write legal briefs, they can write news articles, they can generate photorealistic images based on just simple, non-technical, non-expert level inputs or prompts. And so a lot of folks are asking questions of, okay, so what can this do? What ethical quandaries does this bring up? The problem of generating deep fake celebrity, mapping a celebrity's face onto some pornographic image or video. What are the ethics of this? This is now possible for the first time in human existence, unfortunately. What kinds of questions do we need to be asking? So that's where exploratory researchers kind of live, kind of out on the bleeding edge of stuff, where phenomena are new. We don't even know what really to think about it, so we're asking the what level of questions. And then descriptive research is a lot of where a lot of master's students tend to be working. You're not necessarily concerned with figuring out the next grand unification theory to combine, quantum physics with general relativity. You're more describing some specific application of that through, like the when would be, what's the seasonality of some issue on the fields that I'm collecting water samples off of, or soil samples? Where are these fields in relation to similar studies that have been done elsewhere? Geographically, we're in southern Illinois. Are we on the glacial scrape section, the glacial till and moraine section, the unglaciated section of southernmost Illinois? Descriptive research like that, like where do this particular set of farming problems happen? Do they coincide with glacial soils or Aeolian, like wind deposited soils? Is it a problem here and not there? What's the relationship? What's the correlation there? Who is encountering these things to the tune of how much money and stuff like that? So descriptive research tends to be more deductive. It can also be inductive, describing the phenomenon of Apple being $1 trillion unicorn of a company. And then explanatory research is a lot of what PhDs try to do. So explanatory research is making that critical leap between describing a relationship between two variables, a correlation. When I increase the soil temperature, I increase the rate at which nutrients are eluted out of the soil, let's say. Or as I increase temperature, I decrease the soil productivity because the nutrients are getting washed out at a faster rate in hotter soils. The explanatory research is getting at that causality. It's not just that temperatures are associated with more or less of a rate of nutrient loss. It's that those temperature changes are driving that loss. So correlation versus causation. That's the difference between descriptive and explanatory research. And again, at the master's level, you're not always on the hook to have to do explanatory research. That's very, very specific in the work that's done there, and it's really big and really hard, and sometimes you just want to get your master's degree and head on to a productive career with NRCS or something like that. Sometimes you want to go into research professionally full-time and might be working more in the explanatory space. Different strokes for different folks. None is better than the other. All of these need all of the others. So there we go. We'll get more into the exploratory and explanatory stuff now from here. So just real quickly, for the space that master's students take in this class are usually in, exploratory research, you're going to see this identified in stuff like the project proposal that your advisor maybe wrote to NRCS or to USGS or something like that, to get funding to bring you on to do stuff. They may have written a pilot or done a preliminary study and said, hey, this is what we found with this real quick 3-week, $10,000 study. Can you give us $250,000? I'll bring on a couple of rockstar grad students and we'll get this bigger project done. We'll really answer some of these questions instead of get sort of a vague early sense of it. So exploratory research, is really pretty critical. There's a lot of exploratory research happening formally and informally. It is not typically commonly published on its own because they're small, they're quick. A 2-week study in July isn't enough to characterize the dynamics of soil nutrient transport across an entire growing season. It's just not. But it is maybe just enough of a quick snapshot to say, hey, there's something weird going on here. Let's chase some funding. Let's bring on some awesome human capital and get the bigger descriptive study done. So for your research, the question becomes, are you working on a pilot study? Are you, most commonly, working on a descriptive study where you are describing and characterizing the phenomenon, showing the strength of associations or correlations typically? Or are you in a longer, much more hopefully controlled study where you can rule in and rule out specific mechanisms or procedures or sequences of things that have to happen in a certain order, in a certain spatial and time arrangement as well, in order to get at the explanation of things? Why are these correlations present? What's the mechanism? How does this work? Okay, so how would you describe as exploratory or descriptive or explanatory your particular project as it's starting to come together? Emphasis on starting to come together. Would you say you're running a pilot study? Are you deducing the finest level of inner mechanism of stuff? Are you describing something kind of in between those two extremes? Where are you at?
It would be described, not exploratory, but...
Okay, yeah. So go on.
I think for mine, we're trying to find an answer to stream research that hasn't been very common. And we're trying to come up with between exploratory and descriptive?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Maybe that's where mine's more at. I was like, because it's definitely not like they're trying to, it's like a small thing where it's like, oh, we're just seeing if it works, but it's not like a ton of research has been done on it.
Okay.
Already.
Yeah, so a pilot study is specifically that. It's the spot in between, okay, we've satisfied that there is indeed some phenomenon here. The what definitely exists. Now we need to at least start to get into this space of where do we find this? Like, where do we need to be collecting field samples? You know, whom do we need to be talking to in order to get access to their fields to do that? What time of year do we generally need to be collecting samples in order to try and capture this sense of our question? And then, you know, once you guys do your thing and figure out the where on the map, you know, like you're making a heat map of where this is a thing, for example, then you have some sense of, okay, now we can roll out those same procedures or slightly modified procedures, but basically the same thing, maybe tweaked, you know, to be more efficient or more applicable in all the college states around us. And for the next 10 grad students through, they're essentially replicating what you're doing across a bigger where and across a wider when and more with whom's and so forth. That would be squarely and descriptive, following kind of more of a pilot effort that straddles exploratory and descriptive research. So that's a cool spot to be in. I mean, you guys are really surveying the initial landscape that other folks will start, you know, moving through in some more detail, but you guys get to be kind of frontiering a little bit, as well as just doing kind of the nuts and bolts of, all right, we, you know, sampled in this place that we thought we should sample in, and so forth. So that's cool. Awesome. Descriptive research, a lot of social research, because human beings, because societies, because corporations, whatever you're studying, can't be sort of locked up into a fully controlled lab type situation. A lot of social research necessarily has to kind of stop at the descriptive level. Early physical sciences research, like theory of evolution, stuff like that, very descriptive. And then it posited a theory of evolution based on, hey, we've got all these field observations. Look at these sort of fine gradations and divisions between what we're calling species. Here's how we think this might have happened. Descriptive research, pretty straightforward. Descriptive research can be very satisfying in the sense of, if you're the kind of person who likes to, like, finds a lot of satisfaction in, like, filling in the last box in the New York Times crossword puzzle, like the whole thing is complete and detailed, you're probably going to get into descriptive research. Like, if you really like filling in the details, putting in that last puzzle piece and stuff like that, getting the complete picture, that's where descriptive researchers really live. And physical sciences research these days, you know, we can do lab experiments. We can also do, you know, quasi-controlled or quasi-experimental field plot outdoor stuff, but we can't control some things like weather. And we can correct for it statistically, it's correct for weather effects, but we can't necessarily fully control it in a completely sealed or hermetic system. Hermetically sealed is a term out of alchemy, but it got carried forward into research, as research was in part born from the medieval practice of alchemy. Pretty cool stuff. So practically speaking, for you, for me, as researchers professionally right now, the kind of research or the level of research that you're doing with pilot versus descriptive versus explanatory stuff, that very specifically kind of determines the stats that you're going to use. So a practical outworking of kind of all this high-level theory stuff of, is it exploratory or explanatory, is what buttons am I pushing in SPSS or SAS with JMP or whatever your statistical software is, RStudio. Descriptive research is usually univariate, bivariate, starting to verge into multivariate. But multivariate statistical procedures like building up multi-regression models, stuff like that, you're starting to propose a mechanism, saying the how and the why something works the way it does. And so that's pushing into explanatory. Descriptive stuff is like temperature seems to vary, have a relationship with, be correlated to latitude. Across all of the 10,000 sites we're sampling descriptively for this set of field studies, when we look at the average temperature across all these places corrected for time of year, it just seems like temperatures drop. They are negatively or inversely correlated with latitude. As latitude gets higher, as we get closer to the North Pole or the South Pole, then it looks like the numbers get bigger. So, there we go. Does that make sense? So if you're not real sure like what in detail to put in the statistical analytical procedures section of your methods as you're putting together your proposal, let this slide be one boxcar on that clue train. With descriptive stuff, again, everybody is always going to be doing univariate stuff. What's the range? What's the mean? What's the arithmetic mean? What's the trimean? What's the geometric mean? What's the harmonic mean? Whatever the central tendency value might be. What's the standard deviation or the variance across this particular measure, and so forth. And then bivariate is just relationships of variable x and variable y. How do they behave relative to each other? So scatter plots. Cross tabulation is a statistical version of a scatter plot. It's just a table, and each cell is each combination of variable 1's levels and variable 2's levels. And you just make a table out of that and see where the actual data, which bin or box they go into. And then looking for linear and nonlinear trends. So the value of any particular variable using time, for example, or sampling iteration as the other variable, is there a directionality to it, right? Very, very straightforward stuff, non-controversial. The data simply are what they are. The controversy, the stress come in for your advisor or for you if you're doing more explanatory research in proposing a statistical model, in our case a statistical model with quantitative nomothetic style research of I can't just put variable x and variable y on a scatter plot together. I'm saying with explanatory research that variable x is driving variable y. I'm not just looking for some relationship. Is it necessary cause? Is it absolutely imperative that you have x in order to cause the behavior in y? Or is it just sufficient? X is one way that you can get this behavior in y, and so forth. So in like human health study, outward or self-reported energy level is a very general sense of a dependent variable, an outcome in a very complex system, the human body and the human mind. There are lots of ways that you could affect your personal energy level, right? So it is necessary to get sleep. You have to have some functional input of sleep to get the output of energy level. If you don't sleep, eventually you just die, so your energy level is not applicable. But sleep is not the only thing that determines one's energy level. It's also caffeine, and what's the balance of fat versus protein versus carbohydrate, nutrient intake recently. So we would consider sleep as a necessary cause, nutrition also as a necessary cause for current energy level, but also things like your emotional state to be a sufficient cause. So you're going to have an energy level or a sense of your own energy level regardless of what your emotional state is, or factoring emotional state out. So that would put it in the sufficient or contributory cause camp. So this is much more complex, much more specific, and kind of rigid in its setup when you're doing explanatory work. And that means you have some pretty sophisticated statistical tools to use to do that, like structural equation modeling, for example, is one. If you hear your advisor talk about that, you're getting into explanatory research with SEM. SEM is basically a flow chart of regression models. So we can get more into that if you guys are curious about it. Otherwise, we can skip right by. But medical studies, like dose and treatment response type things, when we give someone this specific molecule as a medication at this specific dose with this specific pharmacokinetic dosage concentration, like serum concentration in your blood curve of it getting delivered to the actual cells that need it. What is the change in pathology, disease progression in those patients? If we give somebody a placebo, do we see a placebo effect and the dose is fake, but the person's contributory causes to their evaluation of the progression or the pathology of whatever you're trying to treat with this experimental drug, or its placebo, its sugar pill version? We have to collect placebo-type information because the placebo effect is very, very strong and can confound the sense of how your drug molecule is working or not. So, you are testing the process and mechanism, and specifically, statistically, you are trying to demonstrate ways in which your theory or process or understood mechanism at the outset or design of your study, how do we break it? So if we can design a study that proves some part of the theory of evolution wrong, then we need to come up with theory of evolution 2.0 or theory of, I don't know, whatever the successor to theory of evolution would be, and so forth. Sound good? Okay, so if you really like math, if you really like philosophy and like turning math into theoretical constructs and flowcharts and testing all of the arrows and the size of the box in each spot on the flowchart, explanatory research is super cool and satisfying. It's also hard because it's complex and slow, and everything has to be as perfectly controlled in a controlled experimental setting as possible. So, it's a very different beast than exploratory research, which can feel a little bit more cowboy or cowgirl or cowperson. Cowpoke is gender neutral. There you go. It can feel very cowpoke. Anyway, moving on. So, let's take an example of campus awareness of sustainability issues. An important topic, right? Sustainability, pretty big deal. If we want our kids to grow up in a healthy, survivable, abundant world like we were born into for the most part, sustainability is pretty important. So we've got our problem statement, we've got our justification, project justification statement sort of assumed. Looking at campus awareness of sustainability issues as the phenomenon, what might be an exploratory research take on campus awareness of sustainability issues? Like if we were just exploring that idea for the first time, what kind of stuff could we do? What kind of information could we collect? I'm being careful not to call it data. We tend to think of data as numbers. But what kind of information could we collect about that phenomenon at an exploratory phase?
Could you do like prevalence of knowledge on the
Okay.
issue?
Yep. So almost like a
Whether someone
questionnaire
knows about it.
instrument. Yeah, okay. So a questionnaire of whether or not somebody knows about sustainability in the first place, or if it's just not really a part of their vocabulary or not. That's like a wildlife presence-absence study. A binary variable, yes or no. A nominal level variable for those of you who've taken stats classes so far. Presence-absence. It could be semi-structured interviews. We have some questions about, in the past 7 days or so, can you just kind of talk me through have you encountered issues of sustainability or any campus activities centered on or focused on sustainability, again, in these kind of last 7 days? Usually we try to time-bound a question like that so if folks have a fair shot at remembering anything. So semi-structured interviews, it's a little bit like a survey or test instrument, but it doesn't have closed-ended numeric questions like true false is a 1-0 closed-ended question. It's also open-ended questions like, so tell me what you've encountered in terms of sustainability in the last week or so. And they can answer however they want to. They can start talking about tacos at the student center being raised or grown on campus, ingredients grown on campus or trucked in from Venezuela or flown in from Venezuela in the middle of winter, whatever. Stuff like this, right? Very loose, very flexible. We can take those conversations in whatever direction they need to go. Maybe as researchers, we start hearing about this campus sustainability office, and it's like, okay, so this is a thing on this campus to the point that it's people's full-time jobs to work with sustainability on campus and do things with students. Okay, so what would a descriptive effort around understanding the phenomenon of campus sustainability? Again, so the when, the where, the who or to whom, the sort of advanced level what stuff out of exploratory research, what kinds of descriptive info or descriptive research efforts can we get into around the same phenomenon out of the pilot study or the exploratory phase?
Like differences in awareness based on major or major or
Yeah, differences, associations, or another word for that, correlations. So is there any sort of meaningful difference in freshmen coming in? Are they more or less aware of or concerned with or involved with sustainability efforts across campus relative to seniors or relative to graduate students, right? We might find some interesting differences there. And not saying necessarily why yet, but first we got to uncover, in the first place, there's an association there of year or academic standing level with involvement with or awareness of campus sustainability issues. You're exactly right. That's it. So that would be like a chi-square table of oblivious to moderate to super into it, hardcore, eco-dork, and then so those would be columns on your chi-square table, and then the rows would be things like prospective, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, grad student, faculty, physical plant folks, community members that are on campus all the time, walking the dog or whatever. We could put all of those things in here and then look for, wow, the counts are really high in the oblivious and also prospective student cell of this table. And our counts are really, really low for hardcore and prospective student. But our counts are really, really high among grad students and faculty members on hardcore about sustainability. And they are very, very low count for oblivious and also grad student. So, association, correlation, chi-square tables. We're looking for where the table is stacked high with counts and where the table is just kind of empty and not many people are sorting into those cells. Not many square meters of farm field are sorting into those cells on those frequency counts and so forth. Okay? So, cool. Then we could get into some explanatory level work in our last couple of minutes here on class today of a causality, explanatory type study of why are grad students so much more likely to identify as hardcore about campus sustainability issues, to be meaningfully involved in hours per week or dollars spent, right? If grad students are contributing financially to a cause, that's a huge signal because most grad students don't have $50 million of discretionary income. I don't either. Maybe someday. I don't know. Whatever. But starting to ask those questions of why takes a completely different approach and needs this stuff well known and characterized. We can't even get off the ground. We can't even get past day one on an explanatory study unless we have really good descriptive information to understand the correlations in the first place. So at this point we could design an experiment where we have different years or academic standing levels, prospective student up through senior, and different levels of exposure, and maybe our working theory is that, okay, the major that you pick takes you wherever you're at and intensifies or down-regulates how hardcore you get about campus sustainability issues. So let's say we track a bunch of students from prospective status up through senior, up past graduation, and maybe we capture some grad students too, whatever. And we also track, because our theory is that the major that you pick, your major program, and the culture associated with that program maybe, or maybe the content of the classes, whichever, we can control for those two factors. Maybe that's what steers the fact of seniors way more likely being hardcore about campus sustainability issues than prospective students. Maybe they just haven't had a chance to learn about this stuff and get armed or equipped with the knowledge of sustainability issues and concerns until they get here. So let's track folks through time and do some repeated quantitative measures of their involvement, of their concern level, of how much emphasis or importance they're putting on campus sustainability issues. And the statistics we'll get out of that are, okay, 60% of the time it worked every time. So for the most part, there was a very strong effect of geography and forestry and geology students. They tended to increase as they went from freshman to senior, tended to increase in their sustainability practice, involvement, concern, whatever. And it was like pretty much every one of the geography students, every one of the forestry students, and 43% of the geology students did. So there is some effect of major, and some majors are hotspots for people concerned about sustainability. Other majors, they either got real concerned with it, or they actually stopped caring about it as much as they did when they were freshmen. Something's going on there. Okay, what's going on? So this pair of columns in our data tables on our explanatory study confirm our theory. This column breaks our theory, or at least breaks our theory within this space. So you drill down a little bit more with some finer statistics and figure out, oh, geology has like an earth sciences like specialization kind of within the major. And those folks are super red hot on sustainability. That is their jam. That is their bread and butter. That's what they're here for. When you treat sustainability and earth sciences folks as kind of a major in itself, that's another one of these gold star majors for sustainability. But the petroleum geology, the rock and oil jocks, they don't care about sustainability. They're receiving other messaging that actually makes them colder on sustainability than when they come in as freshmen. I'm making this up, right? This is totally not fair to geology students. There are a lot of good people in geology. But the sense here is, all right, we're looking for how we can confirm or literally break our theories. And that's hard to do. It takes huge data sets in order to be able to split stuff out like this and go, oh, this is broken right here. What's going on? So in the results of the discussion, we bring it all back together and say, yes, this does have an effect, but you have to sort it more finely than major. You have to do it by specialization, for example. Okay, so we revised our theory deductively and tweaked it, improved it after rejecting the original one just a little bit. Make sense? All right, I am over time. I apologize. I want to be respectful of your time and energy. So we'll stop it right there. I'm around for questions if you have them. Otherwise, we'll see you on Thursday. May your trucks drive at 32 plus miles per hour.
They fixed it.
They did. All right, that's good. Okay.
I drove it yesterday and we